Since we're running a little late, I will try and cut this short and not use my full 15 minutes. The motivation for this paper is an attempt to understand what it is that brings immigrants into the full use of their rights once they become citizens. The data for this study come in from the European election study of 2009. The voter study was a study that only interviewed voters. It only interviewed people who had the right to vote. And consequently, when we talk about immigrants, we're talking about immigrants who already have achieved citizenship, or at least the right to vote, insofar as this is different in certain countries. The thesis mentioned in the title is the thesis that people are drawn to participate by their social connections. That it's a matter of being connected to the society in which you live, that there be people around you who will tell you about the election, and who above all will care whether or not you vote in the election. If we start with the first slide, it simply tells us what is the difference between immigrants and non-immigrants in terms of turnout. It's a 12% difference, not very much, but it's enough to give us some leverage in trying to understand what is the source of this difference. What is it that will turn an immigrant non-voter into a citizen, an integrated citizen who is a voter? Now, in addition to the motivation hypothesis, there is also the simple possibility that immigrants don't vote because they don't know anything about the system in which they live. They come to a country afresh. It has political parties that they are not used to. It has political debates that they are not aware of. And they simply don't have the necessary information with which to address the voting act. That's a question that we will have to dispose of before we come to that's a possibility that we'll have to dispose of before we come to the main question, which is whether immigrants become assimilated through the behavior of the people around them and by becoming aware of the nature of the electoral process in their new countries. We included special purpose questions in the 2009 European Parliament election study to test specifically this thesis. Unfortunately, we don't have additional questions that might have enabled us to test alternative theses because we thought this was by far the most likely theory. And as we told you yesterday, the 2009 European Parliament election study was by nature a test study. It was a pilot study for an infrastructure to study European Parliament elections. It was a cut price affair in terms of the questions that we could include, and we had to make our best guesses as to which questions would give us the biggest bang for our buck. We also have to take something else into account when we look at immigrants. The next paper, but one, will spend much more time on this. I will pass over it very quickly. It matters a lot where immigrants come from. Immigrants who come from countries in which elections are always held, which of course means immigrants from other countries of the European Union, but also immigrants from countries like Australia, Canada, United States. They come from countries where elections are always held, and they are not distinguishable from non-immigrants. If we look at the right-hand end of those two lines, they come together over the label that says country that always holds elections or non-immigrant. We can't distinguish between the two. They both vote in European Parliament elections at the rate of about 48% on average. A country that sometimes holds elections sees about half of that turnout, and a country that never holds elections only sees about 28% turnout. By the time you get to the second generation, by the time you get to people whom we only call immigrants because they have a parent who was born outside the country, that's the upper line, you already see half the gap has been closed. So children of immigrants have learnt to vote at about half the rate of native-born if they come from, or rather the gap between the immigrants and the native-born is closed to about the extent of half the gap if they come from countries that did not hold elections regularly. If we come on to the question of campaign awareness, we see that the theory that motivated this particular piece of research looks pretty plausible. People from countries who never hold elections are much less likely to be mobilized. They're much less likely to know that an election is taking place. They're much less likely to have been contacted by a political party. They're much less likely to have attended a political meeting or rally. All of these things are subsumed within the concept of mobilization that I'm using. Immigrants from countries that sometimes hold elections are just a little bit more likely to have noticed that there's an election going on at the time of a European Parliament election. They're just a little bit more likely to have been mobilized in some way. The big difference comes with people from countries that always hold elections or who are non-immigrants. You know, the proportion who are aware that a campaign is going on, who have been reached by the campaign, is hugely higher. So it makes sense to think that perhaps what goes on as people move from immigrant status to assimilated citizen is that they are integrated into the fabric of the political system such that they are mobilized when an election comes on. It's a good theory, but you will see in a moment that it's a shame about the facts. The critical test of this theory is that among the small number of immigrants who are mobilized, we should see high turnout. And what we see here is not that fact. Immigrants who notice that an election is going on, immigrants who are reached by the campaign, immigrants who attend meetings, rallies, whatever else it is, are no more likely to vote than immigrants who are not reached by the campaign, immigrants who are not mobilized. This is a great shame, you know, but that's science. Sometimes the best theories fall flat, and this is one of them. What we need to do now, unless it turns out that my colleague at the other end of the table has an answer to this, which indeed she might, because her research is a much deeper piece of research than mine. Unless it turns out that she has the necessary variables in a different data set, we'll have to wait for the next European Parliament election in which we can run some different questions to see if we can further illuminate why it is that immigrants, how it is that immigrants become assimilated into the political life of their countries. And there I will stop.